Hello everyone, and welcome to the OCASA webinar, Coping During COVID, Resilience Strategies, presented by Dr. Diana Brecher. A few housekeeping items to mention before we get started with today's webinar. All attendees are on mute. If you have a question for me or today's webinar speaker, please send it through the questions section on your GoToWebinar dashboard, or you can use the raise your hand feature to ask your question verbally. To access the question chat box, simply click on the plus sign next to the question header on the dashboard. To access the raise your hand feature, click on the hand icon that is also located on the left side of the GoToWebinar dashboard. We will then unmute your line and you will be able to ask your question. All questions regarding the presentation content will be held until the end of the presentation, when we will open for Q&A. I would now like to introduce our presenter, Dr. Diana Brecher. Dr. Brecher is a clinical psychologist with 29 years of experience at Ryerson University. Diana has spent the last 25 years working at the Ryerson Counselling Centre as a therapist, supervisor, and director, and over the past 20 years, she has also been teaching graduate-level psychology courses at OISE-UT and Ryerson University. Dr. Brecher's long-standing interest and certification in positive psychology culminated in the development of Thrive RU, a campus-wide resilience-based training program and various resources for students, faculty, and staff. She also co-developed Thriving in Action, a course that incorporates thriving strategies and progressive learning strategies, and just recently co-created this material as an online course. Without further delay, let's begin. Dr. Brecher?
Thank you, AJ. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I wanted to start off by saying that this webinar has actually been something that I co-created with my colleague, Dr. Dina Kara Schaefer, and I wanted just to introduce you to her briefly, even though she couldn't be with us today. She has a PhD in learning strategies and holistic pedagogy. She is a learning strategist, a yoga teacher, an amazing writer, and she's very equity driven in all of our work together. And I wanted just to acknowledge that her contributions are very real in what I'm going to be presenting. So I wanted to start off by kind of saying, in all that is uncertain and out of our control, we want to pose the question, what can we do to bring more health and hope to our days? So we're offering not rigid to-dos or glib advice, but just strategies that might support you in both uplifting and grounding your days to help you to thrive even a little while at home. And that these are strategies that you might want to consider, how could you use them in interactions with your students? I wanted to start off to say that at the heart of the Thrive RU model is a five-factor model of resilience, where I think of mindfulness as being at the heart, so in the graphic, kind of the pink circle. And then we have four other components that when they're all working together, we seem to be able to bounce back or bounce forward more easily. So we have mindfulness at the heart, gratitude, optimism, self-compassion, and grit. And I'm going to go through this very briefly and then take you into our Thriving at Home program. So what does it mean to be in the present? And is our mind full of distractions and many, many different thoughts? Or is our mind filled with whatever it is that we are doing in that moment? And so as you can see by this drawing, the little girl is clearly present in that garden, and the adult she's with is everywhere but not there. And so cultivating a skill related to mindfulness can be very helpful in terms of our resilience, because when we are present, we are much better able to cope. The second component of resilience is gratitude, and this is more than just saying thank you. This is really about noticing the good things that are happening around you and truly savoring the kindness and generosity of others. And I'll be talking a lot more about that in the presentation, how that serves to uplift. Optimism is considered to be our explanation to ourselves about why good things happen to us and why bad things happen to us. So it's not the objective reality, it's a story we tell ourselves. And we know that the story we tell ourselves can have a huge impact on our emotional reaction to something. Another component of resilience is self-compassion. And so people are usually very, very good at being compassionate towards others, but often ignore their own needs. So what if you were able to be your own best friend, kind, supportive, and patient in the moment you needed it the most? And typically, we are our biggest critic in the moments we need compassion the most. And so this is an invitation to cultivating these skills, and I'll be talking quite a bit more about this in a moment. And then finally, in terms of resilience, grit is also incredibly important when we want to stick to our goals. So not grit at any cost, not perseverance for everything, but for things that are truly dear to our hearts. Can we choose to engage with those goals in a passionate way and stick to our long-term goals despite the obstacles that we face? So that's essentially what I think of when I think about resilience. And then what Dina and I did is we took these concepts and kind of expanded on them quite a bit to think about how do we become resilient in this very unusual and challenging time. So I want to talk about the shape of our days and how to bring shape and structure to our day when there is no external structure really out there. You know, for many of us who watched the film years ago, Groundhog Day, we make reference to the fact it feels like Groundhog Day, the same thing over and over again. Well, how do we bring that shape to our day? Well, one thing we can do is something called the urgent important matrix. And it's where we do a kind of priority setting in a quadrant, suggesting that something might be urgent and important that we have to engage in today, now. Get it done, must do it. But what about something that's important and not urgent? So it might be a long-term project that when you get closer to the deadline will be very important and urgent, but right now is kind of looming large. Then we have things in our lives that are urgent but not important, and that's often emails or texts or someone at the door where we find ourselves responding, but actually it's a distraction. And the not important and not urgent are the things that we kind of have to get done sometime, but it doesn't truly matter when. So, you know, I think of like, yeah, you know, I have to clean the bathrooms. Like it's not urgent, but it really does have to get done before it turns urgent. So if you can begin to think about prioritizing based on this matrix, you can find it very helpful, and often students find this a very useful tool. Two other strategies around structure are what's referred to as the 15-minute rule. Christine Podesky is the psychologist with whom I've trained. Introduced this in the context of working with clients, but I think it applies far beyond. So the idea is you commit to whatever your planned task was for the first 15 minutes of that task. Let's say it's doing an online exercise class, or if it's doing a job-related task that feels daunting, and you don't feel like doing it when you said you were going to do it. So instead, you commit to those first 15 minutes, and after that, you're free to put it down and walk away, but most often, you're going to keep going because you get some momentum. So this is kind of yoked to getting your motivation back by the idea of following your plan, not your. So we make all kinds of plans when we structure our days, but when the time comes, we don't feel like doing it. Well, what about you just follow the plan anyway and don't use your mood as the decision maker in that context. So if you yoke 15-minute rule with follow your plan, not your mood, you're going to actually end up doing the things that you thought were important, at least at one point in your day. Let's talk about social and social connections in a time of social distancing, which everyone agrees should have been called physical distancing and not social distancing, because we need and want that social connection. So how do we nourish the relationships in our life? So here are some suggestions that you may find really work for you. Is it a daily video chat with full presentness and not multitasking? Is it going for a walk? I did this morning with one of my closest friends on the phone. She was in her neighborhood, I was in mine, but we spent an hour together. Are you playing online games? Are you having windowed visits? Do you spend time to simply appreciate those relationships in your life? This is really important for our mental health. The isolation we've been in for months can have a huge toll on our sense of well-being. And we have to actively, proactively make sure we're getting certain things, certain needs met in the context of our social needs. And so an invitation is, may the first text you send each morning and the last one you send each evening be one of gratitude and appreciation. What would that be like to show your deep appreciation to others rather than mundane texts or, organizing time or whatever? Gratitude is something we're going to be talking about in a little while, is one of those things that is almost a guarantee when we express it. It leaves a full sense of well-being as part of the residue. Let's talk about space. So how can you take care of your physical surroundings? Many of us, when we first went into this period, started looking around our homes and saying, okay, what needs to be fixed or repaired? What can you recycle or let go of? What can you start or create or grow? Luckily, all of this coincided with spring and planting your gardens. So can you clean, repurpose, and declutter the space around you as one of the ways to build a sense of well-being and self-care in your day-to-day? The element of surprise is another strategy that we can use to increase the sense of well-being. So could you start something new and see where it takes you? So what could these new things be? Is there something you always wanted to learn? I have a friend who said, I really wanted to learn German, and I've never had the opportunity. She lives alone. She decided, I'm going to learn a new language. Could you learn a craft or an art form or a musical instrument you always wanted to have access to? Or a physical practice like Tai Chi or Pilates? Something that you can do in your own home without too much dependence on the outside. And then what could happen? Could you experience a sense of play or upped mood, focus, immersion, and flow? So I wanted to really introduce the concept of flow, which is also known as optimal performance. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi is a Hungarian psychologist who's lived in the US for a long time. He's been very much part of the whole positive psychology field. And his focus has been flow. And it's about engagement in an activity that is so fulfilling that it feels like time has stopped. Or time seems to move at a different pace completely, so it passes way too fast. Or this notion of it being stopped. So what is flow? This chart can kind of give you a bit of a sense, and I want to unpack this. So it's always about a dynamic tension between skills and challenges. It's also kind of the midpoint between boredom and anxiety. So the idea is if you have low skill, but a high challenge, you're likely to feel quite anxious. If you have high skill, and very low challenge, you're likely to be bored. Now, when you're in the comfort zone is when your skills and your challenges, you kind of have a little bit more skill than the challenge at hand. Maybe you've done something for quite a while and you've acquired additional skills, and now you feel like you can kind of coast. And that's actually very comfortable. But it does have the kind of risk of becoming boring. So what often happens is either a new challenge comes along or we build in a challenge into our work or our life, and that's when we kind of go into the growth zone where inspired performance is possible and we experience flow. So if we think of flow as the midpoint between boredom and anxiety, one of the things that we can do is kind of toggle back and forth between that inspired performance and the comfort zone. So as we get a little bit too comfortable edging on boredom, bring in a new challenge. When the challenge is too high, increase your skills. And then you toggle back and forth between these two, keeping yourself in this real growth zone where engagement in what you're doing can be incredibly fulfilling. I've worked with students for so many years who will walk into my office and say, I'm bored. And I'm thinking, they need to up their challenge. And students who will say, I'm anxious. And I'll think, let's look at what their skill level is in that situation, be it in social anxiety and they feel like they can't cope with group work, for example, or is it that they're taking a stats class and they don't have the skills and they're so paralyzed by their anxiety that they're not really able to take in much from the lectures, and so we have to work with the anxiety. But if you think of that as a kind of dynamic tension going back and forth between the two, flow becomes something that's quite accessible to others. And I'll be talking about a resource at the end that's available to all of you where we unpack this, and there's lots of interesting readings, etc. So this is a question I'm posing to all of you. Where did the afternoon go? Have you ever felt so engaged and connected to what you were doing that time seemed to stand still, or pass so quickly you looked up and said to yourself, where did the afternoon go? That's what it feels like to be in the state of flow, of being in the zone, as often athletes will talk about. Could you engage in activities that bring you into the state of flow more often and on purpose? That kind of engagement is one of the key ingredients to flourishing and thriving. I want to introduce the notion of shifting and stretching. So what about our bodies? So there's some very interesting research study. This happened, this was focused at McMaster. So sweat so you don't forget. So this was where they split students into two groups. One that had basically a lecture nonstop, and the other one where they had breaks where they were encouraged to exercise. And the students who were exercising before, during, and after the lecture, but still getting the full lecture, tended to have a much better level of retention, attention, and learning than those students who kind of played on their phones during the same breaks. And there's also interesting research that suggests that there's a direct impact on how your brain works through physical exercise. So the brain is often described as a muscle. It's like a comparison that props up the brain. So it's funny, many years ago, back in the 90s, early 90s, when I was writing my doctoral dissertation, I used to say that I wrote my dissertation in the swimming pool and in long walks. And this is before I encountered any of this, but I would kind of feel stuck on what I was working on, and I'd either go for a swim or I'd go for a walk, and by the time I got back, somehow or other, I was unstuck. And it just kind of felt like that was my strategy of getting things done, but it turns out there's some really strong research to explain from a neuroscience perspective that exercise is a learning strategy. And what we have to do is be strategic and intentional about it. So what does that mean? And what does that mean in the time of remote teaching? So certainly Ryerson is moving to an online remote delivery mode of all courses in the fall. I'm sure many of your colleges are as well. So how can we help our students manage that? So the first thing to do is to recognize that we are not disembodied brains, but in fact we are human beings with a full body. And one way to really get in touch with that is through body scans. So within the mindfulness meditation tradition, there's something called the body scan, where you lie down typically. You can do it sitting down as well, and you focus on your breath for a while, and then you start to send your attention to different body parts and simply notice them. So starting with the toes, feet, legs, torso, etc., working your way up the body. And as you focus on that, your mind will drift and you notice it, and then you bring your attention back. And what happens is the kind of traditional body scan is 45 minutes. There can be, you can do it in a shorter period. It really helps ground you into what your body is feeling. And that is a very useful experience, is to have feedback from your body about what you need. And it also functions kind of as a reset button in terms of being able to refocus and dive back into what you're working on. Active well-being in general can be incredibly helpful. Dina and I taught a 4-credit course this past winter where we took the Thriving in Action program and offered it for credit for the Faculty of Arts students, typically in their first year, second semester. And one of their assignments was to engage in some form of active well-being. It could be walks, exercise classes, sports, bike riding, whatever they wanted. And we also gave an alternative as meditation if folks were unable to engage in exercise. And they were supposed to keep a kind of a diary or monitor 3 thoughts before they exercised and 3 thoughts afterwards, reflecting on impact on focus, concentration, performance, etc., and well-being in particular. And then we had them write a paper about it. So that was one of the assignments. And what these 90 students were telling us was pretty much across the board, they often didn't feel like exercising before or meditating. And afterwards, it had a huge spike in performance and well-being. So they were then writing us in a paper why this is such a good idea, which was a really interesting way to get it endorsed. And it's important to recognize that more is not necessarily better. So it's about finding that balance for all of us of moving, not too little, but not too much. And so each one of us has that kind of sweet point where it's just what we need. And if we can find that out and stick to it, it can be very, very kind of health promoting. I also wanted to give some examples of what we call constructive rest. And so this is from restorative yoga. It's called Legs Up the Wall. It's very simple, where you put yourself in that position. And I find it's easy to do that right kind of at a corner where your legs can kind of swing across. And that you rest in this position for about anywhere from 3 minutes or 6 minutes or 9 minutes. It's very helpful to do it in 3-minute increments. And it is a very productive way of resting, and I'm using my words very intentionally, productive and resting. By intentionally giving your body this opportunity to rest, you can kind of reset and find that energy again for whatever's coming in your life. And another version of that is, it's a little bit hard to tell in this drawing, but the knees are tilted together, so you're not even putting any effort into keeping your legs up. And this is another pose of constructive rest that if you just focus on your breathing for either 3, 6, or 9 minutes, you can find that your whole parasympathetic nervous system just settles, and you can find that you're actually feeling rested without necessarily having to go for a sleep or going into a Netflix coma, but actually just feeling better. Service is another concept that I think is incredibly important self-care during this time. And Sonia Lyubomirsky, who wrote the book, The How of Happiness, which I think is excellent, writes, scientific research has provided evidence that practicing acts of kindness is not only good for the recipient, but also good for the doer. And we're going to really encourage that by framing it as acts of kindness. And these are riffs on research that's been done where participants were asked to engage in acts of kindness and then report back on well-being. So we know that there's good research to support these kinds of things. So within the context and the constraints of COVID, can you offer to help a neighbor, surprise a friend with a thoughtful link, smile at people on your walks? I don't know about you, but I'm getting to know my neighbors probably for the first time in 25 years. Having some compassion as other people seem to be losing it. Do you want to engage in 7:30 pots and pans, banging your pots and pans to show support for healthcare providers, and on and so forth? One of the most interesting ones of this list is to do a kind deed and never tell anyone else about it. For some reason, that seems to have a much bigger impact than if you did that kind deed and then talked about it. So how did I help someone today? Could be a question you pose to yourself when you're thinking about how did this day go? What am I grateful for? What do I want to change tomorrow? You know, the kind of reflection that many of us engage in. I also want to talk about simplicity and how important it can be in terms of our well-being. So I'm going to show you this brief video of triangle breathing. So for some people, meditation just isn't what they like to do, but slowing down our breath can be very calming. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to follow the triangle with your breath. So as it's expanding, you're inhaling, and then exhale as it shrinks. And for a few breaths, just follow this, perhaps sitting with good posture, ensuring that you have full access to your lung capacity. And just notice what impact it may be having on your sense of calm. This one is for a minute, but if you go online, you can find a 5-minute version, a 10-minute version, whatever you prefer. And in the interest of time, I'm going to stop this here. And I want to introduce another strategy around activating the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is like the gas, and the parasympathetic nervous system is like the brakes on our nervous system. And so if you inhale now, and then exhale as it drops, and then inhale, hold, and start again. Inhale to the count of 4, hold to the count of 4, exhale to the count of 4, and then hold again. This is what's often referred to as box breathing, and this is a very helpful strategy if you're feeling anxious in any way. And following the ball moving is kind of a way to keep track, although you don't need it. You can, count to 4 and do that. And again, if you're finding that things are just really too much right now, this can be a very helpful strategy just to get grounded. And I want to introduce 3 screen-free practices because, we probably all have too much of screens all the time. So finger breathing. So take your left hand and spread the fingers wide. And then using the index finger of your right hand, you start at the base of your left hand thumb. And as you're breathing, inhale as you go up, and then exhale as you go down, And then inhale as you go up to the index finger, and then down, and then the middle finger, etc. And then when you've done the whole hand, you switch to the right. And this is a very tactile way of regulating breathing and helping yourself get grounded. Another strategy is, if you're finding your breath, focusing on your breath, not all that helpful, is to feel your feet. So we're on our feet pretty much all day, standing or sitting without moving your feet. Just feel the weight and sensation, pressure, and groundedness of your feet on the floor. And then thirdly, this is a kind of a way of really getting grounded. It's often used in kind of a therapy session when someone is feeling very ungrounded. So can you identify right now in the room around you 5 things that you can see? 4 things that you can feel, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And what that does is it gets you focused on those things instead of whatever is racing through your mind. And it's a very good strategy if you're feeling particularly anxious. So I want to talk a bit about stillness and meditation, prayer, and contemplation. And what I was thinking we could do is, this is something that we do in Thriving in Action pretty much every week. It's called the 3-minute calming breath, and it's a really lovely way to get calm and stay grounded. And so if you would, get positioned in the chair you're sitting in, where both feet are solidly on the ground. And if you have a pen in your hand, just put that down. And then try to sit in such a way that with good posture, where your hips and your shoulders are kind of in alignment. And you're positioning yourself in such a way that you are going to step out of automatic pilot and bring an awareness of the present moment. So bring length to your spine and keep a sense of softness in your posture. Resting your hands either facing up or facing down on your thighs, and tucking in your chin slightly towards your chest, and either closing your eyes or looking down towards the ground. Bring your awareness inwardly and begin to focus on your breath. Paying attention to the inhale as your breath travels in your nose, down your throat, and into your lungs. And then to the exhale as your breath travels out from your lungs, up through your throat, and out of your nose or mouth. In this way, you can bind your awareness to your breath. There's no need to change your breath in any way. There's no need to make it deeper or fuller. Just notice the natural rhythm and pace of your breath. It may even be helpful for you to say to yourself, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. Now bring your awareness to the physical sensations in your body. Perhaps noticing the floor underneath your feet, the chair underneath your legs, or other sensations in your body, including places of pressure, contact, or temperature. Now bring your awareness to your thoughts and notice what thoughts are popping up in your mind. There's no need to get pulled in by any of these thoughts. As best you can, just notice them as they occur and let them go. Now bring your awareness to your feelings, perhaps noticing where they are in your body. Noticing any qualities linked to those feelings and not getting wrapped up in what they might mean. Expand your awareness to your whole body so that in your mind's eye you have a sense of your head, torso, arms, and legs, resting here in this chair. Simply get a sense of your whole self being here in this present moment. You might even imagine that your whole body is breathing itself with each inhale and each exhale. When you're ready, open your eyes if they've been closed, shift position, and bring your awareness back in the room to close the practice. Something as simple as this 3-minute calming breath is something I've been using with students for years now. And what they tell me is sometimes they start the day with it and sometimes they end the day with it. Often they'll do it just before an exam, or if they're in the middle of a project where they're feeling really stuck. And they kind of refer to it as a reset button. As afterwards they feel kind of okay again. And that's something that we can insource rather than outsource, and I think is very important. So there are various things that we can use. So there's finger tricks, which is what we talked about, which is following the index finger on the other hand. 50 snaps, just snapping your fingers 50 times can somehow get yourself really going. There are meditations and visualizations that you can use, and we've identified various different meditation teachers who have lots of online resources, as well as apps like Unwinding Anxiety or Headspace, and I'll be sharing these slides and so you can access them. These are folks who are doing all kinds of programs during COVID, but also have done it well before, and they have a lot of wisdom to share with us. I'd like to talk about sleep. One of the things that I became very aware of at Ryerson is the vast majority of our students, if you ask them, will report that they aren't sleeping well and they're not sleeping enough. And they're also not thinking of it as a priority. So they tend to think of sleep as just kind of something that happens when they have time for it, but they're not organizing their life around their need for sleep, which is actually something that I would strongly recommend. So I want to start off with just a little bit of kind of background on sleep. And so there's something called a body clock. And in this body clock, we have, I'm going to just kind of direct you to look at certain things. So at around 7 in the morning, we have approximate optimal wake-up time, and then optimal bedtime is between 10:45 and 11:15. There are variations on this, but that's often how people live their lives. You'll notice evening activities between 8 to 9 o'clock will vary from light exercise, possibly an evening snack, but then there's a wind down time. And I want to talk about the importance of that and how important it is to avoid blue light exposure. And then I also want to bring you from like around 11 p.m. till 3 or so a.m. There's these kind of purple boxes that say deep sleep. And I want to talk about the importance of deep sleep as a learning strategy in a moment. So this is just kind of our cycles of sleep and our brain waves as we're sleeping, kind of traditionally. So there are 90-minute cycles of sleep, and in it we have REM sleep, light sleep, and deep sleep. So the REM sleep, you'll notice, is the green bars, and that seems to get longer as the night wears on. Light sleep as well increases in each cycle, that's the pink. And then the REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement sleep, which is when we're sleeping, we have the longest cycles in the first 2 cycles of sleep, and then REM sleep decreases as the night wears on. So why is this important? When we think about the stages of sleep in terms of brain activity, when we're in a light sleep cycle, what's actually happening is we're clearing away unnecessary information from the day before, things that we don't need to retain. It's like I think of it as a giant broom kind of sweeping everything away that we don't need. Deep sleep is when we consolidate and store new information in long-term memory. So think about the importance of deep sleep for students who are studying and need to remember things the next day. Sleep can be a learning strategy that they incorporate into studying for exams or presentations or whatever it is they have to do. And then REM sleep, or when we're dreaming, is usually when we have insights and creative and innovation solutions to problems. So although our experience of sleep is we're unconscious and nothing is happening, actually the brain is very active and it is serving us well if we allow it to, as a set of learning strategies. So how does a good night's sleep impact us? When I do this material with students, they'll kind of say, oh yeah, I'm much more productive the next day, I'm in a better mood, etc. It increases a whole set of things, all the things we want to see in our students: ability to concentrate, good decisions, social skills, even the physical markers of health. And it decreases things we'd like to get rid of in the first place: moodiness, stress, anger, impulsivity, and even a tendency to overuse alcohol or nicotine. And all of us need buffer zones. So about 80% of us are kind of normal sleep cycles, and about 10% are morning larks, so people who tend to wake up much earlier in the morning and are very refreshed and most productive first thing in the morning. Excuse me. And then there are night owls, who the opposite. They tend to really hit their stride at night, and they're kind of useless in the morning. So, excuse me. Why do we need a buffer zone between a very busy day and sleep? Because we need to transition into being active to being asleep. So that buffer zone is like what I think of as a dimmer switch rather than an on-off switch. So how do we slow down? We can read a book, print book hopefully, listening to music, doing yoga, taking a bath, doing crafts, knitting, stargazing, meditating, playing a musical instrument. These are all non-screen things that slow us down so that we can transition easily rather than get into bed and still have a racing mind. And one of the things we can do to really help us fall asleep is to savor. So what do we mean by savor? It's to relish things, enjoy them, appreciate them, delight in them. It's not just the experience that helps us to feel happy, but it's when we think back on it. In fact, I came across a definition of happiness that I found so interesting, is that it is anticipation, participation, and recapitulation. And the savoring is the recapitulation, is the review. So Neil Pasricha, who wrote a wonderful book, The Happiness Equation, he's a local Canadian man. He talks about these different exercises. So the 20-minute replay is a savoring exercise, is when you've had a very positive experience and you decide to kind of revisit it and almost replay it in your mind. So, you know, may have been a celebration of some sort, or a victory of some sort, or this moment where things were just so beautiful and your heart felt like it was bursting. So to actually spend some time to review that and to replay it. Celebrating good news is another thing, rather than just kind of saying, it's okay. A friend of mine was celebrating her partner's like a significant number birthday this weekend, and she orchestrated all of these amazing celebrations, including having quite a few of their friends come for 15 minutes and stand on the sidewalk near their house and wish her partner happy birthday. So to really celebrate with one another is another way to savor life. Just relishing ordinary experiences, whatever they are. You know, someone's cooked a beautiful meal, having had a fabulous phone call with someone, taking the time to put a spotlight on the experience rather than almost say, check, yes, this was good, let's move on, which is the tendency that many people do because our focus is always around solving problems and not about savoring delight. Reminiscing with people. I did that recently with one of my sisters where we just had this wonderful laugh together when we were recalling a time in our childhood that was really wacky. And so it was this wonderful experience, and it's very fulfilling. Transporting yourself in your imagination to your favorite place. You know, maybe you love to be on a mountaintop or near an ocean or in a beautiful kind of nature spot. Can you go back in your imagination to that time and savor it? Photo albums. Most of us travel and take multiple photos, and when we put them in an album and share it with others, we kind of double the joy of having been where we've been. There's a monk whose name is Brother David Stendhal Rast, and he's done a lot of writing and thinking about gratitude. He also was featured in a TED Talk on gratitude that I often use when I'm training students on the five-factor model of resilience. He says, joy is the happiness that doesn't depend on what happens next. So it's not about just what's going to happen next. It's what we actually carry with us, even in the absence of what's going to happen next. And so that's an interesting provocation, is to think about joy in living and valuing this moment because it's what we have. So within the field of positive psychology, this is research done by Martin Seligman, who's considered the founder of positive psychology as a field. When people are asked to identify 3 good things that happened to them and kind of dig a little deeper and think about, were they an active participant or a passive recipient, and what does it mean about me or my future that this good thing happened? What they found is that there's been a significant uptick in well-being. And in fact, they did a research study where they had folks who've been diagnosed with clinical depression participate in this as an internet study. They were asked to do this 3 good things exercise, and there were 5 different groups of treatment, so to speak. This was one of them. There was another one was on character strengths. There was a placebo group, and on and so forth. Gratitude visit, where you write a letter to someone who's made a huge impact on you, but you haven't fully ever thanked them. And there were 2 out of the 6 conditions in this research that had a significant impact on reducing symptoms of depression and increasing signs of happiness. And the 3 good things exercise had an impact for up to 6 months afterwards, even though they only did the exercise for 1 week. And the gratitude visit had an enormous impact for about a month. So these 2 are, again, 2 things that can have a huge impact on well-being. That is something that you can in-source at all times. But Dina and I modified this for times of COVID, and we've added despite. So despite everything, what are the 3 good things that happened? And that's really honoring that so many of us are struggling with things that we never thought we would. And it's so important that we not minimize how hard this is for all of us. But despite everything, identifying those 3 good things on a daily basis is a very simple way to increase that sense of life is worth living and things are good despite everything. So what about nature? I don't know about you, but I'm finding my time outdoors more precious than it's ever been. So you in nature, can you close your eyes and bring to mind a place in nature that's brought you comfort, connection, solace, or a sense of refocus? Do you have a special spot, a tree, a view, a destination? Bring it to mind in vivid detail. And what does it feel like to conjure and re-experience your special nature place? So maybe you're able to access this spot, all the better. And if you can't, can you recall it? So it's savoring, but it's also, in a sense, space and time traveling, at least in your imagination. So self-compassion and self-care. The first thing we need to ask, and I want to just actually go back a little. We talked about self-compassion as being your own best friend in the time you need it the most. So asking yourself, what do I need? And by listening to what we need and want, we actually build that self-awareness. And that's part of self-care. The next question is, am I willing to give it to myself? There's so many among us who are so good at taking care of others and not so great about taking care of ourselves. So by being willing to give yourself what you need, you're demonstrating that you're deserving of self-care. And can I be my own best friend? So that the support and the compassion and the generosity of spirit that you would show to someone you deeply care about, can you show that to yourself? Soul searching. I'm aware of time, so I'm going to take you through this really wonderful Japanese exercise. So if you could start on the large circle on your left, kind of greenish, what are you good at? And so if you, this is something that you can do in your own time, but you can start with that. So you identify what you're good at, and then moving clockwise, the big yellow circle is what do you love? The pink circle, what does the world need? And the blue circle, what can you be paid for? And then when we look at the overlapping circles, you can see that what you're good at and what you love is really your passion. And what the world needs and what you love is your mission. And what the world needs and you can be paid for is your vocation. And what you're good at and what you can be paid for is your profession. And then if you go into the heart of these concentric circles, you get to ikigai, which is where your passion, your mission, your vocation meet. And if you can begin to think about pulling together what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for, and make it what you do, that's a way of self-care in a really profound situation, I guess. And then finally, steadiness within the stress. So this idea of what is non-negotiable in the course of a day for you to be well. When do you need to feel healthy? Or what do you do to need to feel healthy? Can you honor the realities of what it means to be you and your body and your identities and your life at this time? What do you need to feel well? Is it more movement, more rest, deeper sleep, time outdoors, virtual families with friends, virtual time with friends, or quiet time? Identify your top health non-negotiables and how they make you feel. So just, something to think about. If I don't have my walk every day, I'm pretty much a mess. So that's something I know I have to make time for and have that as a priority, to hear birdsong, to be in nature, to be moving my body, really need it. What are the things you need, and are you making time for them? And what do you need to decide to do, say, or negotiate or arrange to ensure that you have a chance at practicing your top 5 each day? I'm going to end off by just giving you some resources. At the Thrive RU website, you can find Cultivate Your Happiness, the 4 Seasons workbook. That's for faculty and staff. It is a variation on the Cultivate Your Happiness workbook for students, where there are 13 themes And these are the themes. And for the students, there's an exercise for each week of both academic terms. Each week of term kind of geared to the kinds of challenges that students might face at that time in the term. So for example, growth mindset is a challenge that might be really helpful to them during exam period, as will savoring. This is a downloadable PDF that you can download from the ThriveRU website. I've been working with one of our librarians to put together ThriveRU resources in our library, and it's kind of a bit of an annotated bibliography. And so if you're interested in books or resources having to do with resilience, you can go to the Ryerson Library. You can't take the books out, but you can check them out. I wanted to share with you the Thriving in Action website, which you are welcome to access, and I'll be giving you a password that you can use until December. But this is a resource that Dina and I created. It's how to love being a student. And then we have students who've attended our workshops who do like a 30-second video on these different topics. But let's say we just skip the video and go right in. In it, we have modules. So this is a lot on paying attention before, during, and after lectures, paying attention to the body, learning to think like an optimist. And if we go into each one of these, it has additional materials, it has videos, it has experiences, etc. We're in the process of finalizing our faculty and staff guide, and all of this is available to the community until December. And to access it, you go to TF for thrivinginaction.ryerson.ca. And you saw that pop up that asked for a username and password. This is the username, this is the password. And I'm happy to take questions. Thank you and keep well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brecher. Whilst we wait for any questions that may come in, I want to remind everyone that this is a recorded webinar, and the link to the webinar will be made available to any and all of the registrants within the next day or two. In addition, we at OCASA always like to constantly improve ourselves, and we will be sending out a short 5-question survey to any attendees. We really appreciate any feedback you give us, good or bad, to make sure that we make these webinars as useful and entertaining as we can. Dr. Brecher, we don't seem to have any questions coming in. I think you summarized the topic very, very well. We'd like to thank you for your time today. And we have had one comment come in. Thank you. You've provided many strategies that are new to me and we'll be implementing immediately. I think that's shared by many of the people that were in attendance today, and myself included. Please, everyone, stand by for the recording, which will have the password and login in the recording. We thank you, and we hope to see you again at future webinars.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention one final thing, that Dina and I will be running a Thriving in Action Training Institute this summer on how to deliver this content online. And we'll be probably sending out a notice to OCASA. So if anyone's interested, it'll be over the course of a week, a couple of hours each day, to kind of teach our material if you're interested in that. Thank you.
Thank you.